Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live guest interview within Mindful Journey. We are so excited to have you here. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat function. Our guest today, John O'Leary, is surely not someone who needs much of an introduction, as many of you may already be familiar with his story. His film, Soul on Fire, where he was the subject of the film, I should say, his story was released last October. Some of you may have already seen, of course. If you haven't, highly recommend as you can find it on any of your major streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc. John, in 1987, at 9 years old, had been playing with fire, as many of us do, and had many of us did, I should say, as kids, had lit a piece of cardboard on fire. And unfortunately, an explosion had occurred and thrust him, I believe, 20 feet across his garage. He was burned on 100% of his body, 80% of which was third-degree burn. And in those moments, his family was told that he had less than 1% chance of survival. Yet here we see John with us here today, living an inspired life, being a practitioner from afar, from what I've learned of his story, of what it is that he shares with so many of us. He's the author of two books. One is On Fire, the other is a lengthy title, so forgive me, but it's about childlike curiosity, rediscovering childlike curiosity. Could you give us the name of that exact title, John? I
Yeah,
like to not read from a script. I do
you're
this.
great. And the short form of the second book is called In Awe. So
Okay.
just one's called On Fire and the other's called In Awe.
Okay. And then I saw one about unleashing meaning,
Yeah,
inspiration,
that's
and
In
joy.
Awe.
Okay.
And that one's really about like I was watching my kids live life so boldly and so joyfully. And then we were like checking into hotel rooms as adults or business meetings or whatever it was, and just how beat down people were by life. And I wondered what it was they had, the kids, that you and I, and fellow adults have lost sight of, and how do we return to it? So that's the book In Awe. It's about living fully again.
I love that. I love that. Well, with all of this being said, let me tie a bow on this for everyone. John has done amazing work. He has a podcast, Live Inspired. It has over 7 million downloads. I could go on and on about his accolades, the work that he's done and is doing, speaking at over 100 events throughout our world each year, inspiring millions of people. But as you probably have already felt from him, a sense of authenticity and humility. I know that we're going to benefit from that today. So, John, with all that being said, thank you for being here.
Man, when you're reading that rap sheet, it's like, who is that person you're about to introduce? Because it's not me. If you're like, John, introduce yourself. I'm a son of two mighty parents named Susan and Denny. I had five awesome siblings growing up who were for me. Before I got burned, the day I got burned, the months I was in hospital after being burned, and still even today as an older guy, like my siblings are for me. I married way above my pay grade to a woman named Beth. She's awesome. And then we have four kids. I'm a Christian believer. I'm a grateful dude because I recognize how frail life is and like what a gift it is, even if it's not always perfect.
Mm,
So I appreciate all the accolades, but I'm a dad, and I think that's what
mm.
that's what I'm most grateful for.
I love that. I love it. Thank you for expressing that right on the front end and opening the door for me selfishly to go deep right away because you hit us with the in awe piece of that book. I'm intrigued by what you said because from my vantage point, you're spot on. So many of us as adults, we take things so seriously. We stop jumping in puddles, right? As kids, we used to do that, everything is about the next thing. So, why do you think, from your vantage point, we lose some of that wonder, that
Mm,
curiosity, that childlike imagination? And then, secondly, and perhaps more importantly, how do we get it back?
right on. Well, first of all, thank you for doing this podcast and not only bringing me on, but bringing people along for the ride. I think part of life these days is the media telling us that it's never been worse, more at 10 o'clock. And if you don't want to wait till 10 o'clock, they're running it every hour on the hour. And if that's not enough for you, they'll blend it into social media. And you're inundated with these messages of angst and anxiety and hatred and cynicism and negativity. And like that is the world is living in. And then occasionally, Adam, messages like the ones you bring forward cut through it all. And it forces people to slow down and to take inventory of what they've got, to be reminded what matters, to let go of the things that don't. And ultimately, if you're really going even a little bit deeper, to focus on the few things that you can control, which is not the shooting outside of the island of Cuba, which is now the main article in the headline of the day, the blizzards in the upper East Coast, the fires out west and the murders up north, and the shootings down south, like all these things that you have no control over. Your podcasts and the work you do reminds people the things they do have control over. And then the influence those actions can have to make a mightier difference in the chaos that is life. So just starting there, like intentionality is a big deal. When kids are little, they don't follow the news. They're not trending on social media. They don't care. They're wildly, radically living in the moment. You use the example of jumping in the puddle. Anyone who's got a kid or a nephew or a niece has seen that happen. And then a moment later, they see the parent say, "What the heck is wrong with you?" Right? Yeah, what have you done, you fool? Your pants are not wet and the socks are soaked. And I think to your first question, John, what happened? Why did we lose it? It's taught out of us. It's taught
Mm.
out of us first, sometimes by our family and neighbors and grandparents. It's certainly taught out of us in the education system. I married a wife and was raised, I married an educator and was raised by one. So this is not a knock against our great educators. But if there's a right and a wrong on a test, and we are graded and celebrated for performance, it should come as no surprise when we're told there's one way to do things that we begin to believe it. And then
Mm.
we become more individualized, more singular in the solutions forward. So
Mhm.
a lot of our work these days, I'm coming from a burn center right now. It's kind of about breaking out of the mold of the way everybody else says you need to live your life, doing things that are good and pure and faithful and life-giving for others. And if you do that enough over time, it changes not only their world, but yours.
Mhm. Wow, powerful, powerful sentiment. Agreed with you wholeheartedly, on the educational piece. Also, a deep appreciation for educators. I actually spent 1 year teaching school right out of college. I got into it because I felt like I'd been let down as a kid, just with some
Right.
negativity of educators. So I do think that so many times we're being told, like how to think, and we lose this sense of curiosity over time. And I love that you're talking about breaking out of that mold.
Mm.
For our listeners, I'd be curious if you have examples of things that you've done in your life, because from my vantage point, you are you're very, the way that you deliver. And again, I'll to want to be mindful. I'm sure listeners don't want to hear me continue to just pat you on your back, but I want to
No
be
one wants it. No one
mindful.
wants it less than I do. Trust, like I don't like the pats on the back, man. I want to go to work. And I want
Yes.
to do it with friends who,
I
by the
love
way,
that.
don't always look, act, worship, and vote like me. I think
Mm.
I think you should be sure enough in your faith and sure enough in your politics that you're able to do life and love people who are different minded than you. And
Mhm.
if you look at children, clearly they are. And
Mhm.
as you look at adults, we become less capable of that one.
Mhm.
And so I just,
Mhm.
man, there's room in the tent for all of us. Like there really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you got on stage, when you started to take the stage, and I know in the movie it shows you. I'd be curious if you actually threw up the first time presenting. I know it shows that in the movie, but you took there's thousands of speakers in our marketplace today, and from my vantage point, again, I think some take on this robotic approach. They don't embody who it is that they are. What
Right.
have you done? And I want to tie this to our listeners. So first question, were you actually that nervous that you threw up the first time you spoke? And then second question is, what have you done to ensure your uniqueness stays intact? Is there something you rely on that our listeners could do that they would show up as uniquely them in a world where everyone wants to box you into something?
Awesome. So when you did that beautiful intro a little while ago, you mentioned John got burned as a 9-year-old. And then, like in the next sentence, after recovering, and now he's the author of 2 best-selling books and a movie, and that's true. But what about those years in between? So for me, when I got out of the hospital, 100% burn is a death sentence. Like the little girl I was just visiting was 28% burn. That's a big deal. Like it's trouble. So 100% burn is, it's not like, 50-50. There's no way he survives. So the fact that ultimately little John does survive is a miracle, but I never knew it. And it's one thing to be told it by your parents or your doctors or whatever, but like I never intrinsically knew that my life was a gift. So if you don't know something about who you are, you also can't celebrate that individually and for others. So I never told anybody how I got burned. I tried to be normal throughout grade school and middle school and high school and college. And afterwards, my life changed when in the back row of a church service, a pastor said, "You got one job. It's to say yes to being used for good." So I'm 28. I'd never really said yes to being used for good. The following day, this is all true story. In the movie, they have a mom, pull up and invite me to speak. In real life, it was a phone call from a Girl Scout. And had she called the week before, I would have said no because I'd never spoke and had no interest in speaking. And I hated my hands and I hate my scars and I hate my past and I don't love my present. But the day before, I was challenged to say yes to being used for good. And so I did say yes. 2 weeks later, I did walk into that school building, made a U-turn, walked back out to my truck, threw up, put a piece of gum in, walked in, did a 4-minute lousy keynote to three Girl Scouts. But dude, you got to start somewhere. Like I think it's underrated this idea of start where you are. Like we all want a bigger social media following and more money and bigger trophies. And what's stupid? Like start where you are now. And so this little 28-year-old started with three Girl Scouts. I was fortunate that one of the dads on the way back out to my truck walked me there and said, "Man, that was terrific. Would you speak at my Rotary Club?" And I don't even know what I'm doing, but I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And then there was a lady from Kiwanis, and then someone from a Chamber of Commerce, and then a guy who ran a prison. And this, as you're now knowing, awkward, introverted, ordinary guy just kept saying yes to serving. So I wasn't trying to become like Zig Ziglar or
Mm.
Stephen Covey or you name whoever the guys are and ladies are you look up to on the circuit. I was trying to be as uniquely who I was and who God made me to be as I possibly could. And I would beg your listeners if that's something you want to do more of. That authenticity carries the day. I'm I hope people don't hang up on me before I finish this sentence. I'm frequently told that I'm the best speaker people have ever heard in seminar. Why? I'm not that articulate. I stumble. I dangle prepositions. I step on my own toes. I walk with a limp. My fingers are amputated. Like everything about the delivery is not perfect. So then what is it about it that they're like, dude, that was killer? It is the authenticity, and the authenticity is delivered with them in mind, not me. I don't care about
Mm.
myself. I share as vulnerably as humanly possible for them, not me, not my ego, not my money. So I think the more we can be who we are for others, we become free to excel.
So beautifully said. With the scars, with the reminders of the past, how how difficult was it for you on the front end of that, right? You confidently show us your hands now, and having undergone the amputation, there's a confidence that it shows, right? That's authentic. But when you first took that stage to those young ladies and the Girl Scouts, were you afraid of what they might think? And if so, how did you have the courage to keep saying yes to these opportunities?
That's great questions. I was terrified of what they would think. I think I spoke with my hands in my pockets the entire time because if they can't see it, you're not less than them. And that's how
Mm,
I kind of navigated life, not only in front of the Girl Scouts, but for the 20 years after being burned. If they don't see your brokenness, you're not. And over time, and I mean not like three speeches or 50, but like hundreds, what I began to recognize is the more I could vulnerably share, the more they would vulnerably embrace, and the more we could do life together afterwards. And the more I would hear the sentence, "John, it's nothing like your story, but," and then they would roll. And they talk about
mm,
bipolar, suicide ideation, losing a child due to cancer, of the first marriage that fell apart, the bankruptcy, the abuse they felt from their father as a child, like what things they don't tell their neighbors and friends. they would tell a stranger. There's an old writer who I used to love. His name is Henry Nouwen. He's a spiritual writer. And Nouwen wrote, "What is most personal and private is most universal and sacred." That's like a very good line. What is most personal and private is most universal and sacred. And if you plug that into what it means for you as a speaker or in selling life insurance or being a nurse, I don't care the job. When you know yourself well enough to love yourself and share yourself, you give permission to others to not only know you, but to be liberated to be who they are. And so that's what I've recognized over decades of now speaking is just the more I can just kind of walk out there, not egotistically driven, but selflessly motivated to show them what they can do in their lives.
Yeah.
There's just one plus one is not two anymore.
So great. What I'm hearing from you, I want to try to reinforce our listeners is having something bigger than them driving them. When you've taken these opportunities, it was never about John. It was never about let me show everyone how great I am. It's about how can I serve you? How can I add value to you? Did I capture that right? Is that
That's
what?
perfect.
And so
Always.
I love that, John. So I subscribe to that. I'm a firm believer of it. You may be familiar. I trust with Simon Sinek's work, and he was really probably the first in the market who talked about the why. Though you can
Mhm.
look back for history and say businesses who had this deep purpose, this why, this core mission, this vision that was grandiose in nature for the betterment of humanity, often were the ones that able to sustain. Yet I feel, and this is more of a leadership question for you, I feel like a lot of leaders will say these things, but not always embed these things.
For sure.
So you get to work with some of the most amazing organizations, and I trust in that preparation, you might get to sit with the CEOs, et cetera, to learn about their culture. From your vantage point, this is more for our, maybe defined leaders on the call. So I think all of us have a leadership responsibility, even if we're just leading a family. What do you see from what you might think are some of the best leaders that translates into their ability to not only say X, but actually execute on it?
Right. So, in addition to speaking, we have a podcast, and I've been blessed to interview 1,000 folks on ours. And there's a guy named Mike Matheny who was a Gold Glove catcher, a manager, one of the most winning managers in St. Louis Cardinals history. And I was asking him about leadership, and this is a catcher. And he's formerly now a manager and a leader of people. And by the way, just to like say, for those who do not know who he is, Tony La Russa managed for almost 40 years and was asked one time, would you ever let any of your players date your daughters? He had two. And he said to this interviewer, in 40 years of managing people, there's only one guy out of all the men I ever managed who I would let date my daughters, Mike Matheny. That's the kind of leader, the kind of humble human that Mike Matheny is. And what he said to me in our interview was leadership is caught, not taught. What that means, because now if you're like, well, what does that mean out of the baseball field? A whole lot of leaders can say things more fluidly than you and I and can talk about their true north and their why and what informs their work and what we're going to do this year and next. Those are words, though. Leadership is caught. It's not taught. It's not what you're saying at the whiteboard or in front of the PowerPoint or in the boardroom or the bedroom. It's how you model it day in and day out, in particular when no one's looking. And
Mm,
what I've noticed about the greatest leaders I know is they may be inarticulate, but they walk the walk, and their words may be profound and beautiful, but they always back it up with their example. So that's
mhm,
one piece that I think is critically important. Second thing is they have this is surprising, I think, humility in a world where so often the leaders that we celebrate and elect are very self-congratulatory. Like we look up to the people with the biggest personalities. I have found that those who do the best work in the most meaningful ways uh, surprise you at where they sit at the table and how little they say at the table and how they're usually the ones carrying off the plates along with the custodial staff and like they're there to serve. So I think
mhm,
that's really cool. And the third, and you mentioned it in the way you framed the question, Simon Sinek had talked about it before him, Zig Ziglar, Viktor Frankl back in the 40s, like the idea of the why of a North Star. man, if you don't have clarity around where you're running and the reason why you're running there, you're bound to climb a ladder to recognize that you had the thing leaned against the wrong wall. And I
Mhm.
think the greatest leaders have profound clarity on where they're going, but that's kind of easy. More than that, it's the why behind it, the ability to share that with others, to draw forward the why of the teams that they lead forward, and then to take the necessary difficult steps day after day to get there.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm gonna need to rewatch this myself to make sure I'm grabbing all of this, John. You're giving us such great wisdom. I want to go back to something you shared, just a few moments ago when was saying, folks don't want to hear me pat you on the back, and you were like, and I actually like it even less for someone who shows up with such great humility. How how did you navigate the times when they came to you, whomever the producers may have been, to say, "We want to make a movie about your life"? How do you, because and I want to tie this to imposter syndrome, but I'll talk about that later. I want to start there. How did you handle those moments? And then after the movie's released, I'm sure you maybe in airports where people are like, John, I heard you speak 3 years. How do you navigate that feeling of maybe like not appearing to you enough,
Right.
and just maintaining your humility?
Okay. So we'll start with the humility piece. For me, it's kind of easy. I look in the mirror and you're like, oh, John, you're not that ugly. I'd give you 4 out of 10, maybe 3.5, on a strong day. Like, I'm not talking about the face or the goofy grin, man. My body is burned from the neck to the toes. So this morning when I showered, as I wait for the water to warm up, if I glance in the mirror, and most days I'll glance, everywhere I look is broken. And to pretend like you can cover that up with clothes is a lie. And it's not one I'm afraid of, and that's not one that embarrasses me anymore, but it just is a reality. So it just roots me. It just reminds me like how frail life is, how imperfect I am, how big our God is, and the call to do more with the life in the days that you have. So for me, it's a morning ritual of glancing and then recognizing, whoa, I'm glad I'm here. Let's go do some work. But it's
Mhm.
not about me. And I think as you're looking in the mirror at your muscles or your wonderful bank statement or whatever the thing is that is making you feel like you've got a lot. I would just encourage you to recognize how quickly that can all be drained. Trophies rust and money spends and hair turns gray and bodies wither up. So this stuff is fading. And if you don't have the right mindset, that's almost debilitating. But if you recognize, so what do I want to do with this moment? It's liberating. So that the first thing I would encourage folks to do is glance in the mirror and don't pull your chest back too far. It's a good
Mhm.
thing to recognize that you're not perfect. So that's number one. It's easy for me though. Then you talked about the movie. Well, the movie came on the heels of throwing up in front of three Girl Scouts. So like if you go back to the Genesis story, like dude, you're not that good. You got sick in front of three brownies, man. Come on, like you're not that killer. You did not get a box of Samoas for your hard work for the keynote, and it led to a Rotary Club and onward. So like the whole thing was kind of this awkward journey up to ascend, but none of it was with the intent of ascending. It was of serving, which meant as we in 2013 and 14 and starting into 15, we're like, how do we scale this impact? Like, well, let's write a book. And like that way people can go home and give it to their spouse or loved one. They can learn more about the stories we didn't have time for. So we wrote On Fire. It became a national bestseller, then an international bestseller, which meant it was able to touch a lot more lives. And then In Awe came out and all this other stuff, the book and the podcast. Everything we do is about how do you take this megaphone to impact individuals, not to grow top line revenue or bottom line profitability or following, but impact. So, when at a conference, a woman came up named Linda and said, have you ever thought of turning your story into a movie? I said, no. And then she goes, well, can I try? I said, of course. I don't care. But I never thought it would happen. Like things like that. You get approached, you're in this world too. You get approached by a whole lot of folks with crazy ideas, and they usually don't come to fruition, and that's all right. And what happened with this one is she was able to raise enough funds to have like a real rider attached to it. and then a director named Sean McNamara, who had previously done Reagan and Soul Surfer and Miracle Season and like all these films. Ultimately, if you're like, well, what are they about? They're about real life human beings who had massive challenges. The community showed up and look what they did. That he wants to tell the world that there's reason for hope. So when
Love
McNamara came
that.
in, I'm like, that's cool, man. Then they had to raise a whole bunch of money, and I'd been disengaged this whole time, but recognized if we're going to do it, we gotta help. And as a speaker, we have access, as you mentioned, to a bunch of CEOs and folks with influence. And man, I hate asking. I really do not like asking for anything. But if you believe it's about something bigger than you, get over yourself. And so I just picked up the phone and would set up coffee meetings and then cast the vision for impacting the community. And it wasn't easy, but it wasn't that hard. And so we raised the allocation, we hired the actors, we portrayed the true story. It's a real story on film, blessed at the end of the production to sell it to Sony. That's like threading a needle. Like there's no guarantee that we were going to get distribution.
Hmm.
It was theatrically released. And then, as you also alluded to, it was eventually drawn back, and now it's streaming on all the platforms. So it's been a wild ride of humbly saying yes to having your life used for something bigger than you.
Hmm. So much to unpack there, and one of the things um, that I think will add value for our listeners, because I get asked this question a lot, and I'd be curious from your perspective, because I think a lot of people struggle with this, is the asking. And just like my cold outreach to you, you were kind enough and gracious enough to accept. And I think when I've told, and I've been blessed to have so many amazing folks just like yourself join me for these conversations, and people have said, well, how do you ask? What do you say? And for me, it's kind of innate, because
Right.
I believe in the end beneficiary of my work, kind of like what you said. This isn't about Adam or ego, but I would love to hear from your perspective for people who might be fearing asking for promotion, fearing asking out the man or woman of their dreams, fearing asking their doctor to assess what it is that they've got going on when they
Mm.
know that maybe there's a diagnosis that could be lingering. What can people do to get over that fear they may have of asking for help, of asking for what they need, of asking, period?
There's a lot there. Um, the first thing around asking is you cannot do life by yourself. You cannot do life by yourself, period. So there's this, I think, wrong belief that life is about becoming independent. You become independent from your family and independent from, if you're really strong, even from your spouse. You really don't even need your spouse. I mean, because you're independent. And the real goal is not independence, it's interdependence. And this is something Stephen Covey talks and writes about, but that the goal is not independence. It's certainly not dependence, but the highest point is interdependence, where we lean into our brothers and sisters and we allow them to lean back into us. So that's critical. That's an important piece to recognize. Secondly, to make an ask requires you to either be all for you or all for others. But regardless, it's got to be clear on why are you doing this? So you brought up Simon Sinek, and there's a guy he quotes in his book named Viktor Frankl who survives the Holocaust.
Sure, yeah.
And if you've never read Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, it's just kind of like almost like 101, like it's not self-help kind of or inspiration, but I mean, this guy lost his whole family. And I think 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, many of them with the last name Frankel, many of them aunts and uncles and family members of Victor. And he barely survives, just comes out, creates something called logotherapy, which changes psychology, then writes one of the most important books ever written called Man's Search for Meaning. How do you make sense out of this one? And one of the powerful quotes within that is when you know your why, you can endure anyhow. When you know your why. When you know your why, you can endure anyhow. And so this idea of tethering the ask into a why, into a mission, like a North Star, greater than the adversity and the risk of failing. So we've got to have a big why. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're like, well, John, give us an idea, finish the sentence. I choose to thrive because. And that helps you get,
Mm,
I think, helps you get clear on what your why is. I choose to thrive because, and it's got to be big. And if you yawn while you're writing that out, you cross that one off and you do it again. Because it ought to be
mhm,
the kind of thing that you'd fight for. I choose to
mhm.
thrive because. So that's the second piece. And then the final thing you mentioned, John, gosh, a lot of us are dealing with fear when we make the ask. The two great motivating forces in life are fear and love. And our politicians and our media and our social media and many leaders are bent toward fear. Do this or. That's how parents work when they're tired. Do this or. But the other great motivator, and I think it's the far more effective one, is love. And I saw it modeled as a child, watching parents go through struggle. I saw it modeled as a child after I got burned with the way the leaders in my hospital and the team that showed up and my mom and dad guided this kid forward. Again and again, I've seen what happens when people shift their motivation from fear into love.
Mm,
It changes the internal dialogue. It changes what we dream about and sleep about and pray about and fight for and let go of. It changes what we say and how we say it. You can hear when people are speaking with love, and you can
yeah,
hear when people are speaking from anxiety or fear. You can hear it.
yeah,
And so, in a marketplace that is very familiar, hearing anxiety, hearing fear, hearing hate, I would encourage you to choose love less for securing the assets to make the film or the sale or the promotion, and more because if we don't, the world is going to catch on fire and we'll be reduced to ashes. We'll be
mm,
reduced to the lowest common denominator. So that for me, this idea of basing your motivation on love is not just for excellence professionally. It's for radical transformation interdependently, like as a community.
mhm, mhm. So take us back to 9 years old when you're in that hospital. And in the film, there was a powerful scene, and it was almost like contradictory of sorts, where when you first were pulled out of the house by your brother and sisters, you say you want to die. And then
Right.
in the hospital, your mom asks, do you
Mhm.
want to live? That struck me more. That was like a profound moment of, a lot of parents in those moments would say, of course, John, you're going to survive. And I don't know
Uh-huh.
if it was, if that was a line that your mom shared or not. But at 9, when our brain's not fully developed, we might not have this understanding of all that's forthcoming or could be forthcoming in our lives. How do you recall drumming up the strength to responding back to your mom,
Mm.
yeah, I want to live?
Great questions. And it's several fold again. None of your questions are like A or B, John. They're all
Yeah,
like
I'm sorry.
fill in the freaking blank, dude. Abraham Lincoln took the presidency because you're like, oh man, that's hard. I don't know. All right.
I'm,
So
well, you've been, by the way, I mean, my mind is blown by your answers. I tend to be introspective myself and deep, and you are amazing. So, sorry if they're too deep.
I love it. It's life. And I find shallowness is it's such a waste of time. Why are we talking about the weather and
Yes.
outcomes in sports games when life is so much bigger and better than that? So anyway, let's talk about bigger and better things like a 9-year-old boy coming out of a burning house with no clothes and no skin on and looking up through agony and seeing the home that he was raised in burning because of something he did. And then looking back down and seeing your own flesh, but all of it gone. So why did you say in the front yard you wanted to die? Because that's exactly how I felt. And then what changed? A sister helped me in the front yard and she told me she loved me. She told me to take the hand of God and walk the journey with him. A second sister, and the movie's beautiful because it's true. Like sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. The 7-year-old sister of my name, Susie, goes into a burning house 3 different times for water. So in the front yard that day, I wanted out. I wanted to die. I wanted a knife. And this little girl goes into a burning house for water. So that happened. The paramedics showed up and they were generous. The doctors were kind. The dad came into the room just like he does in the movie and he says, I love you and there's nothing you can do about it. All those things happened. And then my mom comes in and she says, baby, I love you. And I say, Mom, knock it off. Am I going to die? And she said, "Do you want to? Your choice, not mine," which is so freaking bold. I mean, come on. Um, she had no idea how I might answer that, but she was going to go along regardless. And I said, "Mom, I don't want to die. I want to live." And her response was, "Good, baby. Then look, take the hand of God, walk the journey with Him, and fight like you never fought before." She said, "Your daddy and I will be with you. We're not going anywhere, but do your part and fight." And so on that day, Adam, I'd been through the worst. I'd been loved by some of the best. And then I had this bold mom remind me that your choice matters here, and be very mindful in which path you want to go because you'll end up on that path. And
Mhm.
then you asked about the complexity of, well, how do you live into that, and what's that like? And for me, from a kid who grew up in like a pretty faithful family, I believe that God could create miracles. And I know many of your listeners may not, and that's all right. Again, there's room under the tent, man. Let's have a conversation, but let's not fight with each other. Let's just talk. It seems okay to disagree. And at least it used to be. Now we just cancel each other and vote the other party. Like, that's so crazy.
Yes.
Why would we not meet in the middle and talk?
Mhm.
Um,
Yes, so well said.
so my I grew up in a home where we colored pictures of Jesus walking on water and calling people out of boats to walk with him. And as a kid, I believed that could happen. So when my mother said, "John, take the hand of God and walk with," like, okay, I can do that. And for months we did. And eventually, though, you realize that it's not as easy as just waiting for the miracle. Like, what happens when you're living in agony? And so oftentimes when I was a kid, it was easier to be faithful. And it gets harder when the prayers you lift up don't get answered, seemingly, or when the relationship you pray might bear fruit doesn't, or when a health crisis with a neighbor's child doesn't get redeemed the way you expect, or when your best friend in college is in a single car accident and dies, or when you graduate college and you've never dated and you wonder, will I ever? So there's so much more complexity, but if we can just keep our eyes a little bit shut and moving forward, I have found that in time it becomes clear why those things were happening and what it's leading to long term. I think we're playing such a short term game of chess. And there's this radically complicated three-dimensional in time and space and eternity game of chess that we do not understand.
Hmm.
But if you have a little bit of faith, just hang on for the ride because it will be a beautiful outcome.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what do you do today? And I think I shared with you one of the questions on the front end that I ask this of every guest. There's only really three scripted questions. Everything else is kind of ad lib as we're doing here. One of them is to encourage vulnerability, and that question is, what's the most challenging thing you've gone through in your life, and what do you recall having done to get through it? I'm being
Okay.
presumptuous, but I assume that probably the most challenging is you going through the burn, the accident, but everyone sees that strength of you from afar now, right? People, especially who might have seen you on stage, have watched your movie. And it's not lost on me, though, that raising four kids, being married, just going through the hustle and bustle of daily life, I'm sure you still have some moments where you're tired, burnt out, perhaps. What do you do when you feel like you don't have the energy to keep going? And if my presumption was wrong that that's not the most difficult thing that you've gone through, would you mind sharing with us, to your level of comfort, maybe one or two other things that you've dealt with in your life? And again, for our listeners' sake, some of the coping mechanisms that you found helpful to get through.
Awesome. So, second question first. The hardest thing I ever did, I think, was not survive a fire, but to live more fully afterwards. I
Mm.
think, and I'm not cheapening folks who climb mountains or win gold medals or go on great adventures or overcome burns. Like it's all remarkable, but the physical journey is easy. It's the emotional journey that's far more difficult and ultimately far more meaningful. So for me, that's the most difficult thing I've ever done is to somehow figure out a way to love the ugliness, all of it. And then you said, well, what were some strategies you used? Man, gratitude. I mean, I know your whole podcast, if you really unpack what mindfulness is about, like if you aren't grateful, you can't possibly claim mindfulness. How could you? So I live in a very grateful world right now. And that's not something that happens because your life is easy and good or because you're old. It's something that you either choose or you don't, and you either choose it intentionally daily or you don't. So the most important muscle I would encourage all of your listeners and viewers to stretch going forward, regardless of their challenge, is the muscle of gratitude. It will change how they feel about themselves and what they do afterwards. So that's a big, big, big deal. And all research would validate that. And whether it's research on longevity, on relationships, on professional success, on health, on blood pressure, on years, on vibrant, anything you want to track that matters to you, gratitude elevates it. So why would you not stretch that free muscle? So that's important. The first question you asked, you got to maybe even remind me about it. Was it you
Yeah,
said
so basically for listeners who are I tied it into the question I typically ask, which is, what's the most challenging thing you've gone through? I was presumptuous in that, but for people who are going through something in these moments, I'm kind of reframing this now, but they don't know how to get through, John. Maybe they're in a
right.
hopeless state and they're hearing your story, right? And they're inspired by your story. And this is kind of what part of my question was is what do you do on bad days now?
Awesome.
Basically the intent of that question is to help listeners know if they're dealing with a flat tire, if they're dealing with a divorce, if they're dealing with frustration, long lines in airports, whatever, the little triggers that people have
Right.
that can sadly, in some occurrences, ruin days. I'm trying to get to the root of how to get through that.
Perfect. So any human will struggle with flat tires, TSA lines, uh, and everything else in between, and usually a lot more robust and challenging than either of those two things. So, like them, me too. What helps me get through seasons like that is one, a grateful heart. I know we've already talked about that, but if you can be grateful and ask the question, why me? It's alluded to in the film, but it's a true story. For decades after being burned, I asked that question. I just asked it as a victim. Everything, the tires kept getting flat in my life. Why me? And I've always noticed this, but I wasn't able to redeem it or pivot. What you focus on grows. And part of the challenge in some regards with even like some counseling is the more you think and talk about something frequently, the more you think and talk about the thing that is wrong. So there's time and space for professional counseling and coaching, undoubtedly. And yet, the more you talk about something, the more that thing grows. The more you focus on that thing, the more that thing grows. The more you say he's a lousy son of a bee, the more you're pretty sure that your husband is a lousy son of a bee. Or the more you
Mhm.
say,
Yeah.
these are the ugliest hands I've ever seen. They can't throw a baseball, they can barely hold a pen. Why me? The more you realize these are ugly, lousy hands. They cannot throw a baseball, they can barely hold a pen. I'm a victim to my life. Yet when you can pivot forward and say, God, why me? They took my fingers to save my life. The scars are there because the wounds have healed. I'm blessed beyond measure to still be in the game and above ground. I hit the DNA lottery to be born where I was when I was. What a gift to have parents who fought for me and siblings who still do. Why me? So, one of the most important things I would encourage all of those suffering with flat tires and amputated fingers and TSA lines and struggles today is to profess the question, why me? And to demand an answer to it where you recognize you are a victor, not a victim.
Mm,
It will change how
yeah.
you feel about the tire. It doesn't eradicate the air going out of it. Right? I mean, really, like, this doesn't fix it, but it eventually will equip you to fix it. It will encourage you to keep striding forward. So the question why me is a big deal. The question of who can you lean into? And I know some of our listeners and viewers sometimes feel like, dude, I got nobody. I'm glad you had mom and dad, John, and five siblings, and now a cute wife and four kids. Good for you. I got nobody. I always push back on that a little bit. I think most of us do have someone in an AA meeting or a counselor up at church or synagogue, a podcast guest or host that we can lean into. We've a neighbor. We usually have someone. So usually I would say, are you sure? And then the second piece of that would be, what if you could become a someone for someone else?
Mhm.
Today, I'm late for your podcast. Why? Was I just, watching Days of Our Life again? I was in a burn center. I'm hanging out with a 6-year-old girl who's got burns to 28 or 29% of her body and her family and just loving on her, man. And I'm coming home from a long trip yesterday and the day before, a lot of miles, a lot of late nights and early mornings. I'm tired and I want to take time for me. But the more I can lean into my community, the more I can lift up and encourage them, the more I can be there to serve and volunteer, the more I feel full and whole and ready to roll into the day. So I would beg your listeners who are dealing with flat tires, change it with someone else. Changing tires are a pain in the rear end, man. I've done it a bunch in my life. It's so much better when you got a buddy talking trash with you. When you got the guy from AAA saying, out, out, and lean in. The third would be to have a vision. When we are in a burn center bed, as a 6-year-old child is, if that's her life for the rest of it, that's misery. But if I can kind of just sit with her and smile and we can talk a little bit about, my gosh, I was in the same room. The same, can you believe that? I think they painted, talk about that. Like, but I didn't have all these cool bears. And now we're just talking about life. And then when I say, you know what? I used to dream about getting out of this room. Do you ever have that dream? This little girl's like, I'm like, you know what? I used to dream about going back to school. I didn't even like school before I got burned. Do you ever think about going back to school? And then we talk about friends and soccer and basketball and vacations. And she loves Santa Claus. Awesome. I love Santa too. I mean, here it is February. Why are we talking about Santa Claus? But we're casting a vision that is far greater than the misery of this moment. And many of us, and I'm looking at anyone who watches CNN, Fox or MSNBC. I want to make sure I offend every one of your listeners on both sides of the aisle. We are becoming expert at pointing out how crappy this season is, how pathetic she is or he is, the tone they used last night, how miserable this country is. You'll hear this tonight. It's never been worse than these days.
Mm.
Really? Have you talked to your great grandparents about that one? What about their parents? What about the ones who were in the wagons heading west? What about the ones who had lost more than half of their kids until the turn of the 19th century? What about I used to do real estate. Indoor plumbing wasn't a thing in 1900 or 1910 or 9. We are so radically blessed that we're at risk of missing it. And that doesn't
Yeah,
cheapen
wow.
the struggle. It doesn't cheapen the struggle. But when you hear tonight on your favorite cable news that it's never been better, never been worse, turn it off. Turn it off. Cast a vision for your life that's bigger than the struggle today. Lean into your community and take inventory of what you got. You'll be equipped to move into tomorrow in a far better way than you would if you were streaming their tweets or his comments or the misery of the fires out west.
Mhm. John, I can feel your passion. You've got me on the edge of my seat, and I deem myself a passionate guy, but you are blowing us all away, certainly me away right now. Deeply grateful. I want to be mindful of your time because I promised you we'd be at 1 hour. We are at four. Does time still permit for about five more
Yeah,
minutes or
let's go.
so?
Let's go 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Let's roll.
Okay. Great. Because we went so deep that I would like to bring a little bit of lightheartedness to the conversation, and we certainly had that. But um, excuse me, you in the movie, and perhaps this will still be a little bit deep, but you talk about actually this wasn't from the movie. I think I saw this from the MLB Network piece on Jack and the Kid, where Jack Buck, and of course it was in the movie as well, that the announcer of the Cardinals was there and such a prevalent part of your recovery. Do you feel that, first of all, I'd love to hear, let me just start with, so I don't get too deep. Let me start with the baseball piece, why that was so important to you, who Jack Buck was for our listeners who might not know, and what he did particularly in those moments that lit you up and let your soul on fire.
So to hear that whole story, watch the little MLB piece, watch the film Soul on Fire, or get the book On Fire, and you'll be blown away at this guy. And this guy, by the way, one of my favorite things about this guy is he never told anybody he did any of it. So this guy wasn't doing any of this for PR or social media or to be liked by others. He just served. So in this case, this guy, his name was Jack Buck, and I'll be super short in the story, but radio announcer for the St. Louis Cardinals. I'm a big baseball guy. Grew up in the Midwest. He was in 7 Hall of Fames. So he's not a shot in the pants type dude. Like this guy is significant and successful and busy and in demand, but with a servant heart. And he heard the night I was burned that I was going to die. He was at a charity auction, and he left that auction that night. You see it in the film. You see him at the auction, and then you see the camera starts on his tuxedo shoes, and then it kind of slowly pulls up and out, and you see his face, and you realize, holy cow, he's in the kid's bedroom now. And so that's a true story. So Jack shows up in my life. He knows that I can't see. My eyes are swollen shut. I can't move, and I can't talk because of a trach, but I could listen. So I hear him say to me that night, kid, wake up. You're going to live. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. We'll make it all worthwhile. I learned later on that after he left the room, he was told by the staff that the little boy was going to die. And he'd already visited me once, like that's kind of enough. But remarkably, he comes back the following day and visits again. Kid, wake up. You are going to live. He comes back the following day and the following. When he leaves in March to go to spring training, he sends hockey players. He sends the football Cardinals team. He sends injured baseball Cardinals. He reaches out to a friend of his who was in Secret Service, who then writes to the president. So now the president is writing to us, Pope John Paul II. Like this little kid is getting encouragement even when Jack's not there to give it because of him. So that's pretty wild. And then he learns, we kept the promise of John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. We had it. He learns I can't write. My hands, are missing their fingers. So he sends me a baseball the following day. Kid, if you want a second baseball, write a thank you letter. And so I do. So over time, he sends me 60 baseballs, which generated 60 thank you notes, which generated an opportunity for this poor little kid to go back to grade school because of one guy. And so this man, I mean, you talk about a hero. Like what informs my work today is not me. I'm naturally lazy. I naturally say no to podcast. I naturally don't visit kids in hospitals. I naturally stay at home and drink Bloody Marys. That's me. But I watched a man go to work who did not have time, who did not get paid, who did not get the limelight cast his way. And yet, in doing so, he changed the life of so many people in prisons and nursing homes and burn centers. And Jack certainly changed my life.
That's so amazing. And do you feel like his work in your life, I know you just said it informs you, but is he the catalyst that really sends you to burn centers today? Do you
For
feel
sure.
like that? Yeah.
The question he asks is, what more can I do? So that's his tethered question. And if you're looking for a takeaway as you become more mindful and more successful in your lives, the nightly ritual of asking, what more can I do to make tomorrow better, is a very cool way to become more mindful, more healthy, more spiritual, more generous, more successful. Whatever the thing you want to do is, I don't know how to do anything without being intentional around it, without trying to grab little ideas and then add them up. And over time, it becomes like compound interest. At first, you don't even notice it, but then like it becomes a hockey stick or it's straight up. And it's because you've just been stacking relationships and you've just been stacking love and you've been praying and you've been reflecting. You've been more mindful. You've been doing your gratitude journal. You've been reaching out to your neighbors. You've been helping other people change their tires. And then when you get a flat, you got an army of folks that are there for you that say, I'm in. Give me the first twist. I mean, I really mean this. Like you don't give because you get, but undoubtedly reciprocity is a real thing. Like people want to. Since you've been talking, my phone keeps beeping. It's the dad of the girl I just visited. I haven't met a note yet. What would that dad do for me right now? I didn't do it for the dad. I promise you. I did it for his baby. But that guy would he cut down mountains to serve the man who served his daughter. That's what happens when you just keep loving in the community. So I would encourage people. The reason why I do what I do is because Jack did it. And think of the folks who've come before you, the little and the big things they did for you. And then ask yourself, so who are you doing that for today? Because
Mhm.
it takes us back to something you asked 35 minutes ago. When you're having a bad day, what do you do? And there were a lot of things I said, but one of them was, and I serve people. Because when I turn away from my ugliness and brokenness and sadness and turn toward others, my heart begins to swell.
John, That's beautiful stuff. You have been truly, truly amazing. I'm going to pause there and conclude, but I'm deeply grateful to you. I feel your heart for this. I hope that our paths are going to meet in person, and I'll follow up with you offline, of course. But thank you so, so much. Thank you for all who are here with us, who have made it to this point. I hope that John's words inspired you as though they did me. With all of that being said, I'll again conclude here. But John, thanks for the work you're doing. You were awesome.
Adam James, you are awesome. And listeners and viewers, I'm grateful that I didn't bore that many of you back to sleep. So go live, go proclaim the good news, go live it out loud through your lives.
Yes, indeed. All right, my friend. Take care. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
Adam.
See you. Thank you.